Today I'm going to show you guys how to remove the rooftop vent, which is the fantastic fan and a TADA, and install a Maxx Air. And the reason we do that is because the fantastic fan doesn't have automated temperature control. So when this is out and it's hot, I want it to kick in at around 25 degrees so it can start cooling down the cabin. And with the fantastic fan, it's either on or off all the time. There's other benefits for the Maxx Air, which you can look for online, but I'll walk you through what we're going to do. Let's go. I totally forgot to mention, if you guys stick around till the end, I'll show you a cool mod I'm going to do to the fan. So the first thing to do is you want to remove this cover. And it's just a plastic, like a frame. So it has a couple of screws. You can see the holes here, which are down here. And you just simply unscrew them one at a time, and then when you're done, it'll look something like this. The next step is to unscrew this from the outside. So let's walk around on the outside and have a look. Just keep in mind, before you start unscrewing fans and disconnecting live 12-volt power, that you are not sending power to your fan. So the way to do that is you can disconnect your battery, and make sure you disconnect if you're plugged into the wall. Another way to do it is to take the 5th fuse from the top down. Now that, in my case, it happens to be the 5th, but in your case it might be different. So you want to make sure when you pull it out and you try to turn your fan on that it will not start, and then you're good. So then you can proceed with the remaining work that you have to do while being safe. Just a word of caution, you're going to have to climb up pretty high. So I have this ladder, platform ladder, which is a 9-foot ladder, which lets you get up on the platform. I'll show you. And it's pretty steady. So next up, you're going to have to climb up here. This is a lot sturdier than the tab, but still, just to be safe, I wanted to put down some rubber backing so that I don't put my knee on the rooftop. So once you've done that, the next step is using a metal knife like this to lift all this die core away from the screws, which I've already done. You can see that. So all you need to do is lift it enough to expose the screw heads, and then you unscrew them one at a time. So here's what it looks like. You can see there I haven't taken them out yet, but all these I could reach from my ladder. So my next step is to remove all the screws. So sitting on top, you can see, got a bit of space up here. It's the only way I can really reach these screws down here properly and not make some huge mistake with my drill or something. So I'm gonna go ahead and take those out. So in order to take this out, this seal here of die core all around has to be cut up, and you have to slowly start separating this from the alufoil. Because what happens if you just try to push this up is the alufoil will just come up with it. And I'll try to show you here. So if I go underneath and just start pushing, this is what happens. It just lifts the top of the alufoil. So I'm going to slowly work on disconnecting this and slowly try to pry it out gently without scratching the roof. Now the seal is always flexible and it's always sticky. So the only way to really do it properly is to make a slight cut. Make sure you don't cut the roof. Make sure you don't scratch the roof. So once there's a cut all around it, then I'm going to have to try to lift it with equal pressure all around it so it slowly kind of unsticks. So let's see what happens. Closest to me is already split up, and I've managed to push this underneath and slowly lift it, but it's starting to bend. So clearly this isn't unstuck enough for this to lift without bending the frame underneath. So I'm going to have to do a bit more work and cut a bit more before I start yanking. It's coming. Here we go. I pulled it out. Actually, it took only about 3 or 4 minutes of cutting. So I just cut this side, and then I slipped the knife underneath and just try to push as horizontally as I could, so you're not grinding into the metal. You're sort of trying to lift it. And I got to about here. So it took a bit of effort. But then with both hands I grabbed this spot and slowly pulled it up, and it just kind of started disengaging. It is slightly warm right now, which makes it a little bit easier, but this is kind of what it looks like. And you can have a look at what the roof looks like. So there's an aluminum substructure here, and then the rest of it probably has the wooden beams across it, but you can see the metal, and like there's the alufoil, and then there's plywood, thin piece of plywood. Then all the structure is on this layer. Then you got more wood, and then you've got your marine carpet. Okay, so the next step after you've cleaned up the opening is to apply butyl tape. So butyl tape is this permanently running stuff. It's also used for car windows to seal it from the outside. It's actually got many uses, but in this case it's flat, and there's a tape. It looks like tape, and there's the non-sticky paper. And so what happens is you cut it up and you install it like this. You trace around. You put your flange down. So I did this. I started by doing this, and I traced the pencil line around. And then you lift it, you cut it, you put it in place, and then you start peeling it back. Now once you're done peeling it back, you're pretty much ready to install that flange. So here's the flange installed and screwed down, and I went around and just trimmed with just my plastic knife. I just trimmed excess butyl tape that just spewed out. And just a tip here, if you're going to screw this down, use a drill that has a clutch. That way you set your clutch at a certain point and it all evenly screws down at the same level. Otherwise, if you overscrew, you're going to have a low point. And when you have rainwater, it's going to pool down at the low point and, eventually probably make its way through. I mean, probably not, but you don't want that. So I don't think it's necessary to over tighten this. Just go around and look at it and see that you don't have any low points, which, mine's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So I'm good with that. So the next step is to fit the fan on top. Also note, these must be on the side of the trailer. So there's the front of the trailer. Those have to be on the side. If you install them the other way, you're going to be installing it again. Okay, so now you've fitted the Maxx fan in place, and you want to screw this in, and then it tightens it down and it's all locked and you're ready to go. And you're itching to do it right. So here's pro tip number 1. Don't. Lift this up, run your wiring in this cavity here, let it sit like this, cut your wiring, connect it, shove it in the cavity, and then put it back. Because what's going to happen is, if your wiring is not in that cavity, you won't be able to put the shroud from underneath that hides all the stuff. So just make sure you take a few seconds to cut your wires to size and put it in the cavity before you screw it down. You can always come back and unscrew it, but what a pain. Number 2, if you're going to put Dicor here, don't install the fan first because you can't get to the back here. So I'm going to take the fan off and then do the Dicor and then put the fan back on. Here we go. Here's the completed install with the trim, which they call the garnish. You do have to cut the trim, and there's a couple things to watch out for. There's 4 screws that go into your ceiling, and depending on your model of tab or TADA, you have to be really careful to see where the wiring goes for the fan. In our case, the wiring is here. So I had to cut a little slot here, like a little vertical channel like this on the garnish, so that I can push it through and not cut the wire. Also, these screws sometimes can pierce through the wiring internally, so just make sure you know where your wiring is before you install it, because there's 2 ways you can install this. You can install it this way, or you can turn it 90 degrees and then the screws fall in a different place. So that might be important for you in your application. In our case, it didn't matter. This is what's left of the garnish after I cut off the excess. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to video it while I was cutting it, but I used a jigsaw and a table like this in order to cut that, and I went very slowly. First, I marked it with a line for the depth that I needed to cut, because obviously this is designed for all sorts of depths of ceiling thickness. I also used the original garnish from the Fantastic fan, and what I did is I put it down, and then when I had the original garnish before I cut it, I put it inside this. So once it was inside, I was able to push this around without scraping the bottom of the new garnish and scratching it up. So that's a little tip that might help you when you're cutting it. If you do use a jigsaw, just be really careful. Make sure you're bracing this against something and you're never holding it where you're cutting, and then you should be okay. Otherwise, you can always cut it with a plastic saw for plastic plumbing pipes. It just takes a bit longer, and this thing will flex, so you can't give it too much pressure, otherwise you're just gonna snap it. But you can see the cuts from the jigsaw. I mean, they're not perfect, but it doesn't matter because that part is hidden inside the ceiling. So here's how the fan operates out of the box. You turn it on. And then when you turn it off, or if the auto temperature sensor turns it off in the middle of the night, this happens. So by using this kill switch here, we've disabled the motor. So now when you turn it on, the fan turns on, but it doesn't open. So I'll just go ahead and manually open it. But now in the middle of the night, if you turn it off, or it turns itself off, it just goes off. And then if it gets warm in the morning and the sensor kicks in, it only kicks in the fan. And there you go, nice and quiet with one simple little button. There's an easy way and a hard way to do this mod, and of course, you know, I'm not going to do it the easy way, but I'll tell you what the easy way is. So this motor receives power from the circuit board from here. So if you want it to go in manual mode, which I do, all you got to do is unplug that, shove this back in, and then you use this to control the raising and lowering of this mechanism. So that's your mod, and it'll make your sleeping a lot better. If you want to go one level further and have it switched so that if you change your mind for whatever reason, you want to control it with a switch, you can get a round little rocker switch like this. And what I've done is I've tapped on the positive, so I'm sending it over here, and I'm coming back from here into here. So there's the connection. So I'm going to connect that and basically install this switch. So when the switch is in the off position, this won't receive power, and it'll just be a manually activated lifting mechanism. If I decide for whatever reason that doesn't work and I want it to be fully automatic, I'll just flip the switch and I'll never have to uninstall this again. So there you go. Free mods. Yanni's free mod of the day. Okay, so here's what the button looks like when you're done. You run the wire all the way here, and then you gotta get past the inspector. So you gotta make sure it's inspected properly and, you know, it meets code. Tigger, does this meet code? Yes, Daddy, it does. Yeah, so then you get a little button, and, you know, manual or automatic. And there it is.